Hi everyone, welcome to the Diving Festival. My name's Michael Neary and it's a pleasure to be here. This is the 7th year AIG, Marsh and Deep Sea presented these, so it's been a long-running engagement looking at diversity right across the board, and it's really appropriate to be starting here at Barangaroo with acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge our First Nations people, their elders, past and present, who are the original custodians of the land on which we meet. I'm very proud that over the last 12 months in Deep Sea, we've just employed in the claims team 14 First Nations Indigenous people, so it's great to see that engagement. And I'm really looking forward to today's session where we talk about the gender pay gap. And with that, I'll hand over and we'll start the proceedings. So thank you.
My lovely panelists would like to join me on stage. Kia ora koutou, ko Angela Meyer tōku ingoa. My name is Angela Meyer. I've come over from New Zealand. I arrived yesterday with some beautiful sunshine. Now we're back to what I'm much more used to, so that's good. Today we're going to be talking about the gendered financial crisis, and it is my great pleasure to have these esteemed panelists with me. So we have Elizabeth Broderick, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction to the Australian audience. Elizabeth, I wrote my notes here, legend, with a lot of exclamation marks. You have been, sorry, I don't know, is this really annoying? Okay. So Elizabeth has worked as the Australian Sex Discrimination Commissioner, an officer for the Order of Australia, and also is the founder and convener of Champions for Change. She was also the United Nations Special Rapporteur and independent expert on discrimination against women and girls. So we are extremely lucky to have Elizabeth with us today. Molly, again, another fangirl moment for me. Molly works as a financial educator and is also the founder of the Ladies Finance Club, which I really encourage you all to check out on Instagram and on social, doing lots of amazing work helping women to become fierce with their finances. That's the line which I absolutely love. And Josh, it's great to see you again. Josh, as you probably all know, is the president of Marsh Pacific and the chairman of Marsh Fiji. And Josh has had an amazing career globally as a senior executive within this industry. So again, it is my really great pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for being here as part of the panel. Just a reminder also that this is available, being in attendance means that you are able to get CPD credits. I think that's right. Sorry, that's a new one for me. So all the information is there on the screen as well. So we've got quite a lot to get through today. Please feel free to, for those in the room, we'll have the opportunity to have questions after. But also I'm open to questions during. If something really is a burning issue, please just put your hand up and we can answer that question. Also, please feel free to, if you're online, to use the Slido and to get those questions coming through. So I wanted to start first by asking you, Elizabeth, if you were able to give us, sort of set the scene for us around what are some of these barriers that are really making it more difficult for women to achieve financial equity. That might be the hour, so we'll just...
Thanks very much, Angela. Wait, I just think I have to turn myself on. Yeah. And it's so wonderful to be here with everyone. Thank you very much for asking me to be part of your dive in. It sounds like a great concept, and congratulations to Marsh on bringing everyone together to really explore the issues around diversity, inequality, those issues which are so pressing in this moment across the world. And I thought I might even take a step back, Angela, and just talk a little bit from my role as a UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of women and girls across the world. I mean, in that role, I lead the country missions into different countries. I've actually just come back last week from the South Gobi Desert in Mongolia, talking to many women, young women in nomadic environments. But what I can tell you about this moment is we're seeing major regression on human rights generally. Democracy is in decline, but most importantly on the rights of women and girls and the LGBTIQ community. We did a country mission into Afghanistan last year, which actually just showed one incredibly extreme example. And you may be aware that even just last week or the week before, the Supreme Meyer, who's the leader of the Taliban, the de facto authority in that country, has issued yet another edict, which is about edict number 70, which says that women's voice is an intimate part of their being and therefore should be covered, so women cannot talk in public spaces or essentially outside their houses. So we're seeing the gradual erosion of rights right through. You don't have to go to Afghanistan. Look at the US in this moment. If you care about women's reproductive rights, in almost half the countries of the states of the US, you cannot access abortion, IVF facilities are curtailed. I mean, there's a whole range, and I can give you just thousands of examples. Similarly with LGBTIQ, it's so distressing to see countries like Russia, like Poland, which has 90 LGBT free zones, whatever that even means. So in the work that we do, we often have to speak to people in safe houses or different places. So I think, we need to kind of couch the overall conversation that we're having today in the reality of what's happening in our world. And that's why, as I said to Angela, it's sometimes good to reflect back on this because it just calls every one of us forward in a really intentional way. Because you might think, oh, well, Lord, gender pay gap 10, 12%, what are women whinging about? The fact is, when any one of us, I'm not just talking about women, but any one of us, we have a right to equality, we have a right to dignity. And when any one of us is diminished, even in a developed country like New Zealand, like Australia, and I have to say these are two countries which are really standing out on gender equality in the moment, but everyone's diminished. So in terms of just looking at the pay, the financial inequality between men and women, I mean, I'm sure we'll have a great discussion, but for me, at the heart of it is the different life trajectories of women and men, particularly women's role in unpaid caring work. And we can chat a lot about that. But, of course, because women have fragmented careers, they earn less, they're doing unpaid caring work almost, I don't have exact numbers, maybe 3 times the amount of men usually. And not only that, we live longer, which is kind of the final indignity. You've got less and not only that, for those women who divorce, particularly later in life, they do much worse. So they're just some of the systemic issues.
Yeah. I love what you say about the financial, I don't love what you say about the financial indignity, but I think when we are thinking about the financial lives of women, the pathway is actually to retire into poverty. So,
I used to say, is poverty to be the reward for a lifetime spent caring?
Yeah.
Because that's where so many women in our country.
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, how about for you? What do you see as some of the barriers, certainly within the workplace?
Well, I think, one of the most significant barriers that, we're witnessing every single day is just career progression.
Silencing the only male Truly Josh too.
Is that okay? Yeah, so look, I think one of the biggest challenges that we see in the corporate world is just career progression, full stop. And just the acknowledgement that there's insufficient representation of female senior leaders in the industry. And I can certainly speak on behalf of Marsh in the Pacific region, and it's very fair within the organisation. I'm happy to own that. I think it's fair to say when we observe the proportion of females within the organisation at junior levels, I think it's positive and it's good. Always room to improve. But unfortunately, it does peter out towards the top of the pyramid, and therefore, that goes to create inequality from a financial and equity perspective. I think the other important points which I've been reflecting upon is we're quite focused on the quantity of female leaders in senior leadership roles, and probably not taking that to the next step, and therefore considering the experience of those female leaders once they're in those positions. And I'm also happy to say, as a CEO in a corporation, we are quite focused on targets and attainment. And I'll never forget, actually, the first time I met Elizabeth was at an offsite that we had in Manly a number of years ago. She addressed the Marsh Pacific executive, and I think it was in that forum you made me aware, Elizabeth, that we needed targets, and if we didn't have targets, then what were we actually aspiring to? But we've moved on beyond that. So if we're just focusing on quantity, we're not focusing enough on the experience of female leaders once they get into those positions, and therefore elements of unconscious bias, for example, might be prevalent, and therefore impacting the experience and ultimately the tenure of those women once they enter into those leadership positions. I think that's a big barrier.
Molly, from your perspective, with the women that you're dealing with, what are some of the most significant barriers that you are seeing that are really preventing that financial equity happening?
Yeah, so I think the big one is we still get paid less for doing the same job as a guy, so there's a pay gap. And I know, like, over a lifetime, women will earn $1 million less than a guy will, and make that $2 million if you have kids. So that's not good. And we live longer and we earn less, so we need our money to last longer, because we're going to be around for longer. So I think that the pay gap is a big one. And what we see is when women do take off time, they get that mother's penalty where they come back and their career, they don't get that, they have slow career progression, they might be taking flexible working, so they're earning less. Whereas we see the fatherhood bonus, which is when men have kids, they're more likely to see their career progress and earn more, because society sees them as steady and committed, and they're going to be in that role for a long time. So I think the pay gap is a big one. Confidence as well, and education. So that's what we're very big on at Ladies Finance Club, because you don't know what you don't know. We get women coming all the time to Ladies Finance Club who work in financial services, and there's a lot of shame around, well, I work in this industry, I should know about it. But if you're never taught something, there's a really good chance you're not going to know about it. So if you didn't learn it at uni, if you didn't learn it from your parents, there's a really good chance you just never learn about how to invest, what should you be doing with your money, what should you be doing, hopefully not with your insurances, this room should know about that. But there's just a lot of knowledge that is missing. So I think that pay gap and the education piece are big barriers.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of covered the kind of top issues and all the top systemic barriers. Liz, I wanted to ask you, in the work that you do, what are some of the policy settings or some of the policy makers or the ways in which governments have actually been able to shift this? Have you seen anything that is working both internationally or here in Australia?
I mean, I think, I have to put myself back on again. Here we are. Yeah, I think one of the good things we've seen recently is the government agreed to putting a superannuation layer on the paid parental leave scheme. That was absolutely critical. We advocated back for that when the scheme was introduced in 2011. We also advocated for dads or secondary carers, at that time we called them, to also have access to a piece of leave. Because if you're a government and you want to promote equality in financial outcomes, you want to promote gender equality, probably the greatest thing you can do is shift the division of paid and unpaid work between men and women. Now, the way you're going to do that, I mean, unpaid caring for children is just one type of unpaid work. Actually, an amazing panel the other day where people got up to tell their caring stories, and it was just once again mind-blowing, because it reminded me, firstly, this is the most important work any of us do every day. So let's not kind of devalue it. And we saw it in COVID. It was the most important work we were doing every day. But from women who were, one particular woman who was managing a teenage daughter with severe mental health issues, suicidal ideation regularly, that episodic need for care had to race out with, you know, I'm supposed to be at a meeting at 3, but I need to be at the hospital at 3. Another who was going through IVF and whatever. So I think the policy environment needs to recognise the different caring needs that people have, including caring for elderly. I mean, I told the story of when my mother passed away, and really the greatest gift that I've ever had was not a whole lot of money or whatever. It was my employer saying, you know, take whatever time you need to be with your mum during the last months of her life. And I will always be so grateful to that organisation for doing that. So I think, yeah, you know, the government looking at paid parental leave. The other one that I'm seeing in the South American countries and the UK are the caring credit schemes. So this is the idea that it's trying to attribute some value to women's care work. So the idea is that when you step away from paid work, usually as an older woman to look after your grandchildren, so women are making a decision to leave paid work to do the unpaid work of caring for grandchildren. In fact, they're the largest providers of informal care, grandmothers are in this country. So at that point, the government then says, okay, well, if you're caring 20 hours or more a week, you will accumulate caring credits, which you can then kind of cash in retirement as a premium on your pension. So it's in trying to recognise in some small way the value of that caring work and the value to our society of having people care. So I'm loving seeing some of those policy interventions as well. And then later on we can discuss what can organisations do at an organisational level.
Just to kind of pick up on that, thinking about the cost, the really high cost of childcare. Like New Zealand has the highest childcare costs in the world, right? So I'm just interested in what you're kind of seeing internationally around the cost of actually.
And Australia does have very high, I mean, seriously, if you've got 3 kids, you need the CEO's job. Before you I used to be.
Expensive enough.
And you know, when I travelled around, I used to meet women who were actually paying to go to work. It cost them by the time transport, childcare, this one, that one. And what we're seeing the countries across the world doing at best are, of course, universal childcare. So that starts usually about 6 months. It's at a nominal rate, might be $10, $20 a day. So there is some contribution. And you are guaranteed a place in a quality early childhood education care centre somewhere, you know, quite close to you. So, and in a sense, those countries are doing it well, and you're looking probably at Scandinavian, Nordic countries initially, they see it as schools starting early. It's kind of an extension. So the state has an obligation to educate its population, and that starts at about 6 months. Now, you don't have to use that space. I mean, you might say, well, that's not for us and our family, and that's fine. But if you do decide as a family that you want income and that your child will be, you know, well educated and supported in those types of childcare centres, then there is a possibility that you can do that. And I think that's a very different mindset to here in Australia. I mean, in Australia, your childcare is your responsibility. I mean, do you have granny who can help, your mum who can help you? Have you got a family day care centre near you? Could you afford long day care? I mean, all these options, but they come back to you rather than the state stepping up. And so I've been interested to see just the last month following some of the media around, well, we need universal childcare here in Australia. And I think that would be a game changer.
Yeah, just thinking about that, you know, what do you think the biggest sort of resistance to that is? Because if we're thinking about productivity, if we're thinking about what is participation, if we're thinking about, pension schemes later on, you know, like it's going to benefit everyone. What do you think?
I think it is the cost. Probably. Now, interestingly, there's a whole debate about whether you should give the money to parents to pay, or will that just inflate the cost of childcare? Should you then give the subsidy to the childcare centre direct? All those things, I think, are being worked through. But I think like governments have kind of avoided it because it's a very expensive initiative. But just like education, just like those things, they're an investment in our future.
Yeah.
And particularly with fertility rates falling. I mean, the fertility rate here in Australia is under 2%. Sorry, under 2. And you need to be at least 2.1, 2.2 as replacement. So if we're relying on our own population, we're heading downhill, not as badly as South Korea or Japan, which are about 1.2. I mean, seriously, or China, which will, was it a halving of their population by 2050? I don't know the exact stats, but most countries in the world, the fertility rate is absolutely declining quickly. And part of that's cost of living, but the other part of it is rising education levels of women.
Yeah.
We have smaller families when we're more educated.
Yeah, that's probably a whole other panel discussion. Yeah, we'll go out for wine after this and discuss that in great detail. Josh, I want to come back to you. How, in your role as at March, what are you doing to kind of integrate some policies that will actually really address this financial inequity?
Yeah, so I came into the role on the 1st of January this year, and I very quickly started to establish the strategy for the organisation, and I really tried to simplify that down to 3 key pillars, and one of those is female leadership. And so I set a stake in the ground very early on in my tenure that was very important to me. That was an area where I felt that we needed to improve, not only as an organisation but as an industry. And so in doing so, I've held myself accountable. We talk about our progress against this initiative. We talk about the representation of female leaders above certain levels in the organisation, and our aspiration to improve on those levels. But some of the specific policies, for example, we've just reshaped our parental leave policy. And we did that in 2 ways. So first of all, we extended the benefit. So we extended the benefit from 12 weeks out to 16 weeks. And on top of that, we've also started to pay superannuation on unpaid parental leave. And quite frankly, if I have a call out to the entire industry and for all of you who are watching today and have dialed in, I think that needs to be an industry norm. So if I've got a call to action for everybody who are leaders within the insurance industry and have the ability to influence this outcome in your company, please do that. Because I think that just a transformational moment for our industry that can have a very significant impact on reducing inequality for women, especially as they get to retirement age, because they are living longer. Yeah. So I think that's a really good example. But quite frankly, we're just seeking to embed equality into everything that we do. And what I mean by that is when we're reviewing succession plans through the lens of equality, when we're looking at graduate programs, it's through the lens of equality. This isn't set up. We had a live example yesterday. We had an executive meeting, and we were debating a list of managing director nominations. And I will say the executive is mostly biased towards men, but there was a consistent call out that there was not enough female representation on that managing director list. We stopped the conversation. We recalibrated the list to include some female nominees, and then we've recontinued that conversation. So that was just, I think, a live and hopefully a good example of how we're trying to embed these policies for everything that we do.
That sounds, that's great to hear. And I totally, Tatoko, your commitment to actually paying paternity, whilst on paternity leave, that superannuation. It's absolutely essential.
Can I just add one thing to that, because I love what you're doing there. The other thing is what I'm seeing progressively here in Australia is just a real focus on men and parental leave, as you said. And in fact, most organisations are getting to a 50-50. So 50% of the people that go on parental leave will be men, 50% are women now. And I was caught up with Deloitte the other day, pretty progressive paid parental leave scheme. They removed primary and secondary carers, so there's no such thing. There's just, just parents in a sense, or carers. And what they're doing now is they said they still didn't get as many men at that point. So a couple of years later, instead of putting the entitlement for women up, what they said is whoever comes back then is entitled to a kind of reintegration bonus which can also be taken as number of days of flexibility and whatever. And they've hit 2 years ago, 50% of their people are men or women. So there's good models that are out there which are worth looking at.
Yes, and I think those policies, so yeah, there's a couple of policies, there's the return to work bonus. Also companies like Deloitte and other ones out there, they're paying 150% of the female's salary if they come back to work after, you know, within the first 12 months of them giving birth, which again, just encourages more women to get back into the office. Another thing we're seeing, I think in Sweden, which is really good, is, you know, they get that certain amount of, I think it's 16 months of paid parental leave, whether the male or female takes it, but 90 days has to be taken by the man. It just has to be, otherwise they don't access it. So what that's doing is doing a complete cultural shift. And speaking to people in Sweden, they go, yeah, it's just a given that the men will take it. Well, why wouldn't they? So it's changing the whole culture around it. It's almost looked down upon for the guys not to take it, which, you know, just has such a great ripple effect for women, their career progression. So yeah, there's
families,
kids, families, balance. Yeah, fathers get to spend more time with their kids. Absolutely. So yeah, there are some really great things already happening out there that I think policy can change and look at, you know, who's doing best practice.
If you're looking for inspiration, and just seeing Tim in the front row here has reminded me, so when we actually launched the policy, we used 2 male colleagues, one in New Zealand and Tim here in the front row, I won't embarrass anymore, to share their stories about being beneficiaries of this policy, and hopefully helping also to change the perception that this is just a benefit for female colleagues, and Tim did a fantastic job, and so hopefully, you know, that was inspirational to other fathers who also might be looking to take this leave, and at the same time helping to accelerate the careers of women, you know, by getting back into the workforce faster.
Because I think also what we're going to see is if you're not offering these flexibilities, and I've seen it with multiple friends as well, is they're going to leave the industry, they're going to change careers, they're going to, you know, take other options, and that's such a waste of all that talent, which, you know, and
investment in that talent.
And investment in that talent. A recent friend, very high productive worker, she said, look around at everyone in this business. Not one woman here has young kids. I'm the only one, and you're not offering me flexibility, so I'm leaving. And, you know, and they weren't willing to change. So again, what that means is, yeah, you're going to lose out on that great talent, and yeah, on that investment.
Actually, Molly, I just wanted to ask you, you know, thinking more about the conversations that you're having with individual women and the work that you do, what are some of the key things that you really feel need, you know, what are they telling you about what they need to start really ensuring their long-term financial security?
Yeah, so I think for a lot of them, it's actually what is the starting point, and it comes back down to that education. That's why we do a lot of those kind of starting corporate workshops. We do a lot of online like learning around, okay, how do I get started investing? A lot of the time we think investing is for, you know, men in towers. We don't realize we can do it all on our phone. It's very easy. There's stereotypes that come with that. You know, it's not the taboo, like it's still taboo to kind of talk about money with your friends. So there's a lot of different ones there, but when it comes to like women's confidence and competence around financial education, we are equal. We're equally as competent, but we're not as confident. So what does that mean? If you're not as confident in something, you're not going to do it as often. You're more likely to hand it over to the partner. And, you know, again, an example, I was speaking to a lady a couple of months ago working in financial services, and just didn't know what that starting point was. So I think like the big one is you just got to get started. You've got to teach yourself. There's no magic pill, and it's the education part.
One of the things that we noticed at the table at the platform that we run at Mercer is this real sense of shame.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of interested in the panel's take on that in terms of, you know, feeling like, oh, I should know this stuff, but I don't know this stuff. And Elizabeth, do you sort of hear that?
Yeah, I don't hear shame so much, but what I do know is, you know, the way we nurture and grow boys and girls is very, very different. And I think if you're a young boy, a young man, and you don't have strong financial capability, then, you know, everyone says, well, wait a minute, you know, you're not a strong man. Whereas for women, it's not seen as absolutely core to who we are. And I think that needs to shift right back from the gender stereotypes right early on. But I mean, the other thing I just want to introduce in the conversation is the issue around violence against women, because these issues can be weaponized against women. Oh, you're too dumb to understand about the finances. Let me worry about the finances. And indeed, not only that, but, you know, insurance products, energy products, financial services products, we're seeing more and more, and in the Champions of Change, which is doing amazing work in this area, they called together just last week all the senior members of those essential providers to see how their products and services were being weaponized against women. And just to give you one example of that, the banking systems, for example, until recently, you have been able to put in a description. So I could put 1 cent in my partner's account with a description which was full of expletives, you effing see, I'm coming to get you. And when people like Matt Common and even Peter King, I was talking to the other night, run their AI over their banking systems, they've got millions of these 1 cent transactions, 5 cent transactions. So the actual product's being weaponized as a medium against women. And we know that that's one reason women are absolutely not in public life and in the workforce to the same extent as men. Because let's remember, there's probably around 800,000 to 900,000 women in Australia today who actually are in the workforce, but also living in an abusive relationship. What we need to do the labour market and to that particular workforce, but I think it's an interesting additional dimension. And if for no other reason you're going to be a financial whiz on your own finances, is that that's going to give you opportunity and choice across your life.
Yeah, and I think when you put the kind of intersectional lens across that as well, thinking about certainly Māori and Pacifica and Aboriginal women, it's kind of like, the layers of that become so entrenched. And also I think single parents, I think, is another really interesting cohort, which predominantly are women. And I suppose, Josh, the question really there is, it's great to see that these things are happening within the corporate structure. And sort of picking up on your point, Elizabeth, customers, what can the industry do to support female women customers?
Well, I think generally speaking, I think we have a huge role to play in terms of mentoring and coaching. I think in terms of progression is a huge point. I just don't think we've done enough as an industry to really try and coach and mentor women generally. I think from a customer perspective, we probably really haven't thought about how we go to market. You know, I've spoken about how we focus internally through a lens of equity. Happy to won't. Have we really focused on it externally? I don't think so. To be honest, I think we've just assumed commonality of buyers, buyer propensity, buyer needs, buyer desires. What are we doing? I don't know. Not enough.
Yeah, I mean,
let's own it right now. I don't have a specific answer, because we are focused very internally. Happy to say that. Externally, I just don't think we are. You know, to be honest, where we do think about it though, just to be honest, is match more closely our client service teams to the buyer. So especially for larger clients who will have a unique team of buyers who we can identify, we would try as best we can to match the team that's facing the client, to ensure that there's better connection, equity, etc. in that relationship. As it sort of moves down the customer size to an SME or more of a retail customer, are we thinking about it? I don't think we are.
And just in relation to that, because that's the area Champions of Change have really looked at recently, which is gender equality by design. So looking at all the products and services that you offer, and seeing that they are ones which firstly meet the needs of women, and I talk women and girls, but also are not, are not actually making the situation for gender equality worse and whatever. So they've developed what they call their 7 glitches or malfunctions for the design of most products and services. And they go about it in quite a rigorous way. So I'd recommend for anyone who's interested at looking at whether or not your products and services are actually enhancing gender equality, whether they're financial products, whether they're AI products, whether they're any type of products. I mean, even shopping centres, for example, the work the shopping centre group has done is that they've recognised that the way they design shopping centres actually creates risk for women. Because if you look at all their data, it'll show that most of the sexual assaults happen somewhere down near the toilets, and the toilets are always around in the back of the shopping centre. So one of the design principles is never trade off aesthetics for women's safety. And what you'll see in more recent designs, like the airport designs, you'll see the toilets on the main causeway. So, you know, and they've looked, so they're running the gender equality by design across 60 organisations, from CSIRO to manufacturing to AI, whole range. The architects group are building it into their architectural designs. So it is worth having a look at it and then running your products and services through the structure.
That's extremely exciting to hear. And I also think the other thing, when I, the work I've done in my career has definitely been thinking about women as customers. And we know that 80% of the $28 trillion global economy is in fact actually as women.
Yeah.
So if we're not thinking of, I often say, we're not the niche, we are the market. So I think it's a really interesting flip to go, actually, well, what if we are designing products and services, we should be designing for the biggest cohort, i.e. the ladies. I'd like to come to you, Molly, and this is kind of a personal question, which is thinking about how can businesses, but also, probably thinking now about women as consumers, around being able to kind of balance career advance with family planning. And you've been quite open about like freezing your eggs, and I just wondered whether you'd be open to sort of sharing some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So last year I froze my eggs, and the reason I did that was because I haven't met anyone yet, and freezing my eggs allows me to buy more time, and also for a lot of other women as well, it allows them to buy more time in their career so they can get to that certain level, that career progression. But I think, where we see tech companies doing this really well is they will actually pay for their women to do egg freezing or do IVF. And what that means as well, is you're feeling really supported by your company, that they've got your back, and that's going to, increase your productivity, increase your happiness at work, and also increase your loyalty. So, so the reason I did it was, just to buy that time. And I think it's a conversation that probably isn't had enough. I know when I started talking about it last year in the media and on my social channels, I got so many questions from women being like, I know nothing about this. This is something that I should probably be thinking about. So especially if, you're over the age of 35 or, even younger, it is definitely a conversation that is important to have. And, everyone's at different places in their journey, and we're really, fortunate that we have this technology now, and that, this is an option for women.
Which I suppose it does actually speak to, like, what does family actually mean, which is another kind of thing to be thinking about in terms of creating gender equity principles.
Yeah, and for I think a lot of women, not all women, but a lot of women who if they want to be on that motherhood journey, it takes up a big part of your life and mind consumption. So to know that that's all kind of been taken care of again, I think that just makes you like more productive in the workplace.
It is interesting though, isn't it? Because you're doing the reality of that, which I absolutely support. I think it's terrific, and I've already talked to my own daughter about it. She's now got the boyfriend, so anyway, we'll see. I just want, because especially my young women in professional services organisations, like those big management consultants, law firms and whatever, just the hours. And I think it raises the broader issue of overwork. Because to be honest, if I'm going to go and meet someone and have children and whatever, I have to be able to have work and a life. And I think increasingly, particularly in this time of you know, immediacy, digital responses and everything, the ability for both men and women, but it's a particularly pressing need for women given our additional roles in caring and reproduction and whatever. It's becoming more and more difficult. So I think going to the heart of the business model to try and address this issue of overwork is a fundamental shift that would allow us to solve some of the issues we're talking about.
I actually saw this morning that Thailand, some companies in Thailand are giving time off to go dating and a premium Tinder subscription because they said, and again, it's the birth rate is falling, and they were like, we don't have time to date, and so, so just something to put into the insurance industry. Have a work here again, a Tinder premium subscription.
I was just reflecting on what Elizabeth was saying about overwork. I think it sort of re-emphasises the point about needing to make sure that we're setting women up for success once they get to senior leadership positions, and what does that actually mean, acknowledging that the experience of men and women in those positions isn't always consistent.
Gosh, we're not running out of time. We've got plenty of time, but
wandered from the mandate as
yeah,
well.
it's still very interesting. Josh, I wanted to, it's often gender equity is often something. It's the heavy lifting that women often do off the side of our desks as well. And I'm really interested in what you think it's going to take to get more men interested in this.
That's a really good question, and I think it's not just men interested, but it's men then willing to make a change and drive a difference. And I think there's a couple of factors, Angela. So I think the first is personal experience, and if I think about women that I know in the industry, but women that I work very closely with every single day, my own wife, who used to work in the insurance industry and still reflects upon some of the discrimination that she felt that she received when she was in the industry. That's a huge motivator. And just in preparation for this session, talking to some of the women that I work very closely with and just hearing their stories and having conversations sitting next to each other sort of last night, it's quite incredible. It's been a huge motivator for me. I think understanding the data, you have to understand the data and the impact of unconscious bias, for example, that is having. And when I think about unconscious bias as well, interested to hear what Molly and Elizabeth had to say. From a man, I often think it's coming from a good place too. I think sometimes it's actually quite well intentioned, but we are misunderstanding the impact of what we think is a well-intentioned comment or remark. And so being alive to the language and the words and the dialogue, for example, that we're using around the executive table, I think is a big point and driver of change. I think being a role model too, being the change in the industry or the world that you want to see is kind of where it stops and starts as well, and being, living and breathing the change that you're trying to see.
Thank you. It's exciting to hear.
Maybe just to add on about men, I don't know whether you've seen the Gender Compass research. Rebecca Huntley's done some research. She did the climate compass, and the idea was to segment the Australian society as to those that, trailblazers in climate, those who are deniers of climate change. And she's got about 7 different groups. She just recently released her research doing the same thing across the Australian population, but on gender equality. You've got the trailblazers who just what's the problem? Why aren't we moving faster? Right down to the group that are what she called the rejectors. And in fact, she said the most interesting thing about this research was that the rejectors were a far larger group, probably twice the size of the climate deniers. So I thought that was really fascinating. She said the other fascinating thing about it was that in the climate deniers group, men only represent 1% of that, and they're older men. In this rejectors of gender equality, that young men represent a significant majority or near the majority of that kind of gender equality rejectors group. They think gender equality has gone way too far, and we men are being totally disadvantaged, you know, we're the ones who are being discriminated against. And I think when we talked about where this is heading, it could head to a more difficult place, because what we're seeing is the emergence of a manosphere, which is blogs, webs, dark web, everything, which is, you know, people like Andrew Tate, who I have to say is under house arrest in Romania for sex trafficking, so not your best role model. But Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, those influencers, male influencers. And I gave a speech out at the university the other day, so I thought, oh, I'll go on to TikTok and see how many views Andrew Tate, for example, has. He's not a fringe player. He's had 12.7 billion views of his little TikTok videos, some of which start with quite harmless messages. I'd say good messages, like if you want to be a success, get up and make your bed, take responsibility. Oh, hello, I agree with that. Down to right, really pure misogynistic and hateful. So I think engaging men is just so critical if we are to move forward.
Yeah, because it's not, that's the gender part of gender equity as well. Yeah. Molly, how about you? What are some of the thoughts that you have around, you know, the women that you're working with to really support them?
So as far as the financial education, so again, we do a lot of education on the topic of finance, whether it's investing, insurance. You know, it's still so many people don't understand insurances, what insurances are out there, what they already have, what they don't have. So explaining all that. An interesting point that came up though when I was speaking to women in my community, I said I'm going on this insurance panel because I know I'm working in the insurance industry, like what are some things you're seeing out there? This really interesting point kept coming up, and I hadn't ever thought about it before, but maybe some people can relate. And it was around like the conversations that women just aren't part of, especially the promotional talks. And a lot of this is happening in networking events that they're not part of, whether that be on the golf course, whether that be at the rugby games, whether that be at the pubs after work. And if you've got a young family, you've got to get back to your family, so you might not have the time or the wish to play golf or, you know, be at the pub. And so it was also about creating spaces where we can keep this networking going, because that's where a lot of, you know, the chat has. That's where you really get to connect with people on a different level. So how can we create these spaces for women within these organizations where they're still getting access to those conversations as well, which was just an interesting point that came through.
What do you say around the kind of money and relationships?
Money and relationships?
With the women you work with,
Well, they're not good. So I wouldn't say a lot of people have great relationships with money. But you know, and the great thing with finance is no matter where you're starting from, you can always get better. So it doesn't matter. But I think women and men, like a lot of us don't have good relationships with money. Women feel like, you know, we're a little bit more vulnerable. We can be more open about it. I get a lot of men coming to me as well saying like, I have no idea about ETFs. I have no idea about investing. So sorry, what's the question?
Like that, pretty much answered it. Exactly.
Sorry, I digress.
But it's also kind of interesting to think about, you know, when we think about financial equity and the gendered financial crisis that I bang on so much about, I think we are also, to your point, that the bar is pretty low in terms of financial literacy in a lot of countries. And I'm really interested in like the work that you're doing, Molly, is very much about addressing that. But also for the panel, it's kind of like, what about in workplaces? You know, how do we actually support people to learn more about their financial literacy?
Well, hey, ladies finance corporate workshops. So, but I do think, like, you know, there is that responsibility that that corporate companies should have to help educate and help, you know, make everyone, guys, women and men, feel like they've got a strong financial foundation. So actually, you know, I won't make people put their hand up, but do you really know how much is in your super and where it's invested? You know, are you investing?
Hopefully this room does,
Not necessarily. I know, like, just from the research we see and the data we collect, a lot of people in financial services don't know. We have accountants coming to our budgeting sessions. Just because you do something every day doesn't mean you apply it to yourself. And so actually, you know, setting out, okay, well, how do we then support our staff to learn financial empowerment? Because and again, the research shows that people are taking time off work because of financial stress.
20 hours a week. 20 hours a month is lost in productivity.
Because we're stressing about money, and we're at a time at the moment where the cost of living is high. You'd be living under a rock not to know that. You just go down to Coles. Like inflation is coming down, but it's still, the cost of living is high. So if we can empower our staff with financial education, it's going to make them feel a lot more like stable and so that just again takes one thing off their plate so they can focus on the work ahead.
Which kind of comes back to your point about overwork, and it's kind of the broader piece around wellbeing and wellbeing at work. Okay, wrapping it up, team, and getting ready for questions, which I hope there will be a lot of. Josh, a question for you. How do you think the insurance sector can better collaborate to drive systemic change toward women's financial equity?
Well, dare I say, we should all be joining the Champions of Change coalition, founded by Elizabeth Roach.
You heard it here first.
Absolutely. We were just chatting about it before. I mean, look, just to start, I think that the work that Elizabeth is doing, or as champions, not just on behalf of our industry, but on behalf of corporate Australia, I think is absolutely world leading, and I think she should be recognised for that. My general theme is we can't do it alone, and therefore any mechanism, whether it's joining the Champions of Change coalition, we need to create more avenues to be sharing best practice. What does good look like? What's working? What's not working? Because we just aren't going to solve for this alone. We simply won't. So that's kind of my first point. I think my second point is there's more we can be doing around mentoring women in the industry. That's just a simple observation of mine. We're probably okay at it internally within the organisation because we have mechanisms and frameworks, where we have partnerships between mentors and mentees, and we facilitate. Be doing across the industry, looking out for female leaders, not within Marsh, for example, and other companies that are looking for mentorship, looking for coaching, and all the good things that come from that, better visibility, networking, empowerment, all the good things that come from that sort of relationship.
Yeah. Liz, what about the broader social and economic impacts of gender equity initiatives? How do we measure that? Like, what are some good measures that you think could be sustained long term?
Yeah. So
I know that's a giant question, but
well, what we can measure is gender inequality. I mean, we know what the cost to the Australian economy is of having, say, much lesser workforce participation rates of women than men. But in terms of measuring gender equality initiatives, I think there's a number of ways. One is to start looking at it from right at the get-go, which is, say, people's attitudes towards gender equality. And the Australian, the ABS does that. They put out their personal safety survey. I don't know if people have seen that, but interestingly, that measures what the community thinks about gender equality. And if you look at men who believe fundamentally in gender equality, their propensity to commit violence against women is zero. Now that has a huge saving to the Australian economy. So that's
among other things.
Yeah, among other things. So I think the ABS, but also measuring the potential uplift. Now some of it will be in productivity of individual companies or indeed the whole economy. But I think you've also got to look at the innovation potential when you bring diverse teams together. What do you get? You get a boost in innovation. You get the group dynamics change and everyone lifts. You get the embedding of everyday respect. You get the elimination of sexual harassment and violence against women. Sadly, bullying seems to continue. It's a kind of in both men and women, sadly.
It's not just a gender issue.
It's not just a gender issue. But these are all the things that, potentially, well, they are measurable for sure. And then kind of aggregating that up. But there's no question that those countries which have greater levels of gender equality are more prosperous, they're more socially cohesive, and in this moment, they're more peaceful countries.
And Molly, for you, what do you think as an audience we can do today to ensure that we take big leaps in reducing this gendered financial crisis?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a lot of answers in the room already. So, you know, you can't fix a problem until you really understand the problem. And I'm looking at, and there's a lot of women in this room and they understand the problem. So actually, you know, and I think it's also really important to remember when women rise, men, it's not that men don't, you know, you rise together. And so, you know, we've got to approach it with an abundance mindset, but also like there's a lot of answers that are already in the room, but the right people just need to be actioning them and listening to them. Yeah, and then I guess with the networking piece as well, just, you know, make sure that where those conversations are having, women are, and where the money is being made in, whether it's insurance industries or in certain areas of the insurance industry, make sure there's women there as well, and you're championing women to get into those positions and those roles.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, I'd quite happily talk about this for the next 4 or 5 hours, but maybe I've been given a bit of a wrap up. But I wanted to open it up to questions from the audience, and also some there might be some questions online. Who is going to be the first person to ask a question? Oh, down the back.
It's a mic.
So he's running. So enthusiastic.
Thanks, great session. It was only lightly touched on, but you know, we do a lot of work with, say, Gen AI, looking at that area. If you were to take, and I know Josh, sounds like you put a break on a process and looked at managing director, but if we were to let Gen AI learn from the past, we will regress Elizabeth, because the past tells us boards should be old white men, like me. So I'm just interested in the whole Gen AI and how do the ethics of that, how do we balance it out? Because almost every loan decision, insurance decision, if we just look at patterns, we may end up just reinforcing existing stereotypes in our selection, in our approvals. So it's a very open question.
I'm happy just to say a little bit about it. That is, we absolutely will. I mean, there's so many examples of where the large language models and other things are promoting outcomes which are gender unequal, which are about discrimination. And it's not just women, there's a whole range of different ways. So what we have to do is interrupt that. And I'm sorry to harp on about it, but the 7 Switches is doing a lot of work with Gen AI companies because the 7 Switches work identified the 7 malfunctions that are exacerbating gender inequality in any system, process, algorithm, or design. So it's systematically going through those switches and going through those glitches and turning them. They talk about switching to a much more gender equal outcome. So I think the systematic application of processes and approaches like that's good. And I know Ed, I'm just trying to think of Ed's second name, he was a Human Rights Commissioner who's done a lot of work on the ethics of AI. He does, he's running a lot of, workshops and things like that. And Ed Santo, he's fantastic at that as well. So sorry, I don't know it in sufficient detail to speak really more than that.
Josh, what about?
Well, Michael, I think it's a very good question. Certainly something that we need to be cognizant of. I mean, you know, as an organisation, we've moved pretty rapidly into AI tools, but it's relatively basic at this point in time in terms of the function that it provides, proofreading emails, for example, summarising documents. But hopefully they're also fast learning machines too, and so with time there's an opportunity to be building back into these models appropriate data sets which help better inform decision making in the future.
Kind of like we're on a real cusp of really rapid change potentially. So it's really exciting.
Because there's not many women developing the systems. I mean,
another can of
I think it's got to start there as well. We need more women with STEM skills doing this as well.
Any more questions? Yes, down the front.
I'm just more curious around whether there's any sort of overlay between mental health and the gender pay gap or inequality in the workforce. I know you mentioned briefly sort of the feeling of shame and guilt and things like that. I'm just curious if there's any experiences or any information around that overlay, if there is one correlation.
I can talk a little bit from a New Zealand perspective. There was a really interesting study done in about 3 years ago, and 80% of New Zealand women rated their financial wellbeing as low or very low. So, and the work I do around financial therapy, we also see that. We see this huge amount of shame, this huge amount of, it almost stops women from being able to engage in the tools that are actually there, like all of the great things that Molly's doing and others, because the sense of, it is such a complicated relationship. And so, yeah, there's a big impact on wellbeing, mental wellbeing and financial wellbeing. And as we were saying, if there's 20 hours per month per employee on just being stressed about money, yeah, it's kind of, I think of financial wellbeing as kind of where mental health was maybe 10, 15 years ago, in terms of like, we're just starting to talk about it and starting to understand, the massive impact it has on us.
Yeah, and even the term financial wellbeing, it's only been around, I'd say, like in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
It's just.
Did you have anything to add to that? Yes.
Hi. I don't think I'll need a microphone, but maybe. Thank you. I did have a question. I did want to add to the Gen AI, actually. There has been, to Josh's point, some great case studies of banks where they used AI for mortgage approvals, and they were able to measure what their gender bias was in those approvals. And then they were able to retrain the AI in a matter of months to reduce that bias to less than 1%. And so if you're paying attention to it, regardless of who's creating the model for you, you can close that gap much faster than we've been able to by retraining behaviors and making people aware of their biases. My question, though, was on Wikia, and we receive these reports every year now, I think. They're made public. What is the value, do you think, in that as a data point? And how should businesses be using that, especially the first steps they should be taking if they're not taking enough steps already and they find themselves in a place that's sort of shocking to them or surprising to them in that report? Thank you.
I think the WGEA, so that's the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, it's really important. And what Australia has done this year in releasing the report, both for private sector and now government, is world leading. I mean, the European Union's looking at doing something similar, and the UK, I think, does something similar. But the great news is now, if you're a talented young woman, you can look at the gender pay gap in the company that you're going to join and decide whether or not you want to take your, great skills either there or another organisation in the same sector which has a lower gender pay gap. So we know transparency will drive progress. So I think it's really positive from that perspective. But what I would say is, coming back to the champions again, but McKinsey came behind the champions with a team to look at what are the 5 drivers and 5 areas that every company with a gender pay gap should focus on. And they came up with 5 things. They said, firstly, you've got to focus on is there a gender pay gap with new hires, and what percentage of them are women, what percentage are men? Then second thing you have to go to is the first broken run. That is the moment at which men start their promotion prospects go upwards that way and women go that way. So what's happening there? Then you have to look at the top 10% of earners in the organisation. They're usually the hot jobs. What percentage of women are in there and what percentage of men? The lowest, because these are usually where all the women are congregated, the lowest 10%. So what's the gender breakup then? And then who's getting the bonuses and whatever. So these are some of the points, and then they have a whole strategy and toolbox for each of those areas. But I think probably about 50 organisations are piloting this now to see whether they can more rapidly close the gender pay gap over when the next reporting round comes out. So I think generally it's a really positive step.
Yeah, and I think as well from the consumer point of view, so, you know, people are getting on now and being like, just wait, some of my favorite brands, female brands, have got really bad like gender equality. Okay, that's going to make me think twice about buying from that brand again, which is really powerful.
Yeah, we are out of time, and thank you very much to the panelists for your very interesting conversation. It went in lots of different places, Tinder, premium, you know, Dan, but yeah, but I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time. A reminder that the Diamond Festival is still continuing, so please make sure you check out the different sessions that are on, and also yeah, please use if you have any takeaways from the session, please use this hashtag and, you know, put that across the social so that we can actually keep this conversation going. And a reminder also that this is relevant to your personal development. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. Please have some snacks, and we'll be around for a little bit as well if you'd like to continue.